Joe, you're back in the States. How you doing?
Well, just fine, Tim. I'm, to try to find a parallel for my last couple of months, you'd have to go into, Greek literature, maybe the Odyssey. I didn't get any, one-eyed monsters, but everything else came at me. Last 2 months, fire first, floods. I think God is telling me something. I'm not sure what, but and then in New Zealand, my wife is a hiker and nearly killed me a dozen times on these like cliff hikes she likes to go on. So I'm back in Montecito, and they let us in yesterday. The house had been completely unattended because it was at a mandatory evacuation zone. Mm-hmm. It's military control. There still actually are soldiers in the zones that are cordoned off still. But no one had been here, and so the house naturally fell apart at the seams, and so we've been trying to get it back together. And I walked some of the destruction today. It was the first time I actually had a chance to see it, and it's very strange because, say, 90% of Montecito, you wouldn't even know it had rained. I mean, it's just completely, there's nothing. But along these creeks where we have built homes, as it turns out, perhaps foolishly, there's just complete destruction. I mean, I walked what's called Olive Mill. It's a street that runs near my house down to the ocean. And it was beyond belief. There were homes that had been literally crushed into debris. There were giant homes that had been taken off their foundations and rotated and moved around. Cars were in trees in some places. And then there were rocks, because it's characterized as a flood, but in fact it's kind of a combination avalanche and flood. Large boulders are loosened and then they roll down from the mountains. We're pressed up against these hills, or actually mountains. Some of them are almost 5,000 feet. And these things, particularly with water, they just get rolling and they can't be stopped. They just everything. And so what had been like an area where there are homes is now basically like a waterway with boulders and black mud, and it's just beyond belief. It was such a pristine, pretty, and upscale place, and now these little rivers that run through the community are devastated, and it's going to be interesting to see exactly how they respond. I think it's going to be very, very complicated, the rebuilding of these areas, because the floods shut down Highway 101, which is California's basically not just major but only real commercial thoroughfare. It links San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, and to have it shut down like that is devastating. So I'm sure that the state will want to have Montecito, the waterways, and the permit system where you have all these private bridges. Mm-hmm. All these things can affect the water. The bridges can become, if they're not designed properly, stopped up. You have a dam situation and then flash floods. The whole, concept here is to keep the water in the creek. Yeah. If it gets out of the creek, God help us, because the freeway is very low, and then you fill up the freeway. The freeway was under, parts of it, I would have to say, were 20 or 30 feet of mud. And so that's all been cleared out now. I mean, the local communities couldn't handle any of this, obviously. Way too big a project. So the Army Corps of Engineers came in, and they used dynamite and C4, I think it is, it's called, or something. Yeah, it's C4, and they blew up boulders and would blow them up, have these huge earth-moving, tractors and bulldozers. And, I mean, these things are just enormous. And then they would get everything and put into big trucks, and the convoys of trucks were just nonstop. That's really why they evacuated the civilians, because the trucks were literally going nonstop through the community with these giant loads. They couldn't brake. They had to kind of set up so that they could go right onto the freeway. And they wanted to get all of the debris cleared out so the waterways would work and not have the freeway flooded again. This was the mission. And this was, this is where the military really does well, when it actually responds with its technology and manpower. They had thousands of people here. And so military can be a force of good, Tim, but sometimes not. I mean, sometimes we just are being brainwashed, it seems to me, to see our military in a positive light when, in fact, it's something else. I know you mentioned you'd read a book recently that talks about this. Would you like to give a little book report to us to start off the discussion on militarism and propaganda?
Sure. Militarism, of course, what stimulated this particular topic, I think, was I was watching some football games at my brother's house, and then a couple Sundays ago, and then all of a sudden, during the commercial break, they have these movies that are coming out soon, and so Hollywood appears to be in overdrive now, putting out these pro-military movies. I think there's one called 12 Strong regarding Afghanistan, the first people on the ground in Afghanistan to hunt bin Laden. So they're promoting the standard narrative of the war on terror and the heroic military going in there and justifying our 17th or 18th year of occupation of that country.
Well, they committed 9/11, didn't they?
Yeah. So it was the Afghan.
We have to stop that. So we went in and occupied.
And then there was right after that there was an ad for what Clint Eastwood's latest flick, Tribute to the Empire, and that it's the 1517 to Paris. I guess his story about these 3 or 4 soldiers who apparently took out a crazed Muslim on a train in France, and I guess that justifies all the military spending, the 1,000 military bases, and all that, of the United States U.S. empire, because, once again, heroic U.S. soldiers are saving Europe from savages. So that, got me thinking, they rolled these films out, and of course, Clint Eastwood also did American Sniper a few years ago. So we have these films. But the book is The Complex by Nick Turse. It's a very good book. The full title's The Complex, How the Military Invades Our Everyday Lives. And basically shows just the cultural, economic impact of military spending. And there's a great introduction here. That he writes about just the everyday life, a morning of a typical couple. And I'll just read this. He says, Rick is a mid-level manager in a financial service company in New York City. Each day he commutes from Weehawken, New Jersey, a suburb only a stone's throw from the Big Apple, where he lives with his wife, Donna. The sound there, Donna, and his teenage son, Stephen. A late baby boomer, Rick just missed the Vietnam era's anti-war protests, but he's been against the war in Iraq from the beginning. He thinks the Pentagon is out of control and considers the military-industrial complex a danger to the country. If you asked him, it's a subject on which he would rate himself as knowledgeable. He puts effort into educating himself on such matters. He reads liberal websites, subscribes to progressive-minded magazines, and is a devotee of Jon Stewart's Daily Show. Yeah, that's... it's typical, yeah. In fact, he has no idea just how deep the Pentagon rabbit hole goes or how far down his family already is. Rick believes that despite its long reach, the military-industrial complex is a discrete entity far removed from his everyday life. Now, if this were 1961 when the outgoing President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned the country about the unwarranted influence of the military-industrial complex and the largest arms industry, already firmly entrenched in the United States, Rick might be right. After all, he doesn't work for one of the Pentagon's corporate partners like arms maker Lockheed Martin. He isn't in the Army Reserve. He's never attended a performance of the Marine Corps band, not to mention the Army and Navy's Air Force music groups. But today's geared-up high-tech complex is nothing like the olive-drab outfit of Eisenhower's day. It reaches deep into American lives and American psyche than Eisenhower could have ever imagined. The truth is that at every turn in countless not-so-visible ways, Rick's life is wrapped up with the military. So wake up with Rick and sample a single autumn morning as the alarm on his Sony, Department of Defense contractor, clock clock interrupts his final dream of the night. Donna is already up and dressed in the fitness apparel by Danskin, a Pentagon supplier that received over $780,000 in DoD dollars in 2004 and another $456,000 in 2005. And Haynes Her Way, made by the defense contractor and cake seller Sara Lee Corporation, which took in over $68 million from the DoD in 2006. Committed to a healthy lifestyle, she's wearing sneakers from DoD contractor New Balance and briskly jogging on a treadmill made by DoD contractor True Fitness Technology. Rick drags himself into the bathroom, fixtures by Pentagon contractor Kohler, purchased at the defense contractor Home Depot. Though he squeezes the Charmin, brushes with Crest toothpaste, and washes his face with Noxzema, then hopping into the shower, lathers up with Zest and chooses Donna's herbal essence over head and shoulders. What the hell, he matters. I deserve an organic experience. The manufacturer of each of these products, Procter & Gamble, is among the top 100 defense contractors and raking a cool $362,461,808 from the Pentagon in 2006. In his go his DoD supplier Bausch & Lomb contact lenses, and down goes a Zantec for his ulcer from DoD contractor GlaxoSmithKline. Heading back to the bathroom, he finds Donna finished with her workout and making the bed with the TV news on, and lends her a hand. Their headboard was purchased from Thompsonville Furniture, the mattress from Sears. Pillows were made by Harris Pillow Supply, all Pentagon contractors. They exchange grim glances as one of their on their Samsung set, another DoD contractor. The Today Show chronicles the latest in the chaos in Iraq. Thank God we never supported this war, Rick says, thinking of the anti-war rally Donna and he attended even before the invasion was launched. NBC, which produces the Today Show, is owned by General Electric, the 14th largest defense contractor in the United States, to the tune of $2.3 billion from the DoD in 2006, and has worked on such weapons as the UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter and the FA-18 Hornet multi-mission fighter attack aircraft, both of use in Iraq. So, you get the gist there, right?
Yeah, it does. It's clear.
Yeah. Just that pretty much the defense spending in the United States is so huge, and it's such a it gets into every aspect of American life, whether it's research and development, product development, and a lot of these consumer items that we do use were first, of course, developed for the military, and we can't get it out of our lives because it's so pervasive.
Indeed, I wanted to back up just 1 second, mention that this individual, who is seemingly, is being characterized who is someone sort of unwittingly participating in the military complex that runs the United States, or at least is being characterized as such. But he watches Jon Stewart.
Yes.
Right? And that really made me laugh because, there is a lifetime actor, if ever one existed. He's a classic, should well be studied, by the citizens, because that little piece of work, he has all these jokes and, very lovable in so many ways. And then when 911 comes along, suddenly he's not so funny. And, he's very much lampooning and ridiculing people who are trying to reach the truth about that. Mm-hmm. So, and then, you look into his background, elite Jewish family, his brother's like one of the big financial players in the United States. So, it's just, it stinks. And that individual that you mentioned, he's not only is his soul being sucked out of him by all of the products and the financialization of the military into our lives, but the propaganda is hitting him. He doesn't even know, that he is basically enslaved by the system. And so, all of these things that you mentioned, and that's, I think, really, that was just a great description. This is a good book of what Americans don't see, of how the military has reached out and is controlling our lives, all the products. And that individual he doesn't understand that his whole world, his wealth, his time, his consciousness, it's all actually to some extent under control by the group that controls the military. Mm-hmm. And so, how to wake the guy up? Well, you got to get him off the Xanax, and onto the heroin. I don't know what to do with someone like that. It's like I was thinking about that, and okay, so you have such an individual. He's very much the everyman of our country. But how could someone like that ever, get out of all of the fabric that he lives within? Every product, the TV shows. I mean, it's just everything has been weaponized against him. And unless you get that spark of awareness that this is the case, you're just going to stay in that matrix and be controlled. You see, he's going to end up, someone like that would have a hard time not ending up basically as a patriot, basically as someone who would come to see America in a positive light. We're fighting, in this war, but I don't think someone like that could ever rebel, because I think the propaganda is just effective enough to keep him in a kind of numb living death. I mean, he's like one of these creatures that are captured by a spider and then kept alive in the web for the babies to eat.
Yeah.
It's just a grisly situation to think of him. And I had recently. I didn't see the movie, but I've been studying it, and I intend to. But there's a new movie out called Pitch Perfect 3. And I mentioned, that to you before the show. That
I read the article you sent me.
Yeah, that it's, it's portrayed as a musical. But in fact, there is just complete relationship now between Hollywood, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. Mm-hmm. And there are documents which have been exposed showing that this relationship exists. And then when you see a show like this, and this is a little different to me, and this is something I wanted to mention, is that it seems like the propaganda is getting more blatant, I think, which is interesting. It's like, is this because they're worried about the alternative media? This is how they're going to respond to it. But it's also more clear in the sense that the DOD, the Department of Defense, is basically given credit as like helping produce the movie, because the Army is involved with the creation of the films. And what you see then with Pitch Perfect 3 is something that can be studied as a propaganda piece. You had sent me a video of that contained really old footage that was the DOD had influence in, and they gave video of a TV show called Lassie.
Yeah, that was funny, wasn't it?
Right. So they show Lassie, and in the show that is being referenced in the film, Lassie rescues this guy from a plane that broke down, and Lassie figures out something is wrong with the engine because Lassie can hear the high-pitched whine that indicates there's some mechanical defect. And so Lassie is a hero. That was the original script, but it was shown to the Army because they wanted the TV show producer wanted some help in like having an Army Cessna basically used in the footage. And the Army said, well, okay, we're fine with it, except for the fact we can't have to change the story because we can't have kids seeing an Army piece of equipment fail.
Yeah, no.
Because this was in the 1950s, even then, they were trying to indoctrinate children into this idea that there was something magical and perfect about the military. And that was very telling, that kind of very subtle child propaganda was going on in the 50s.
Yeah, because Timmy there saluting at the end, where he salutes the colonel.
Yeah.
Innocently saluting the colonel. he's the one that's going to be dragooned into fighting in Vietnam a decade later.
That little drug punk is going to be in the Mekong Delta.
Yeah.
You know,
Listen to "Fortunate Son" by CCR or Jimi Hendrix or something. Yeah,
yeah, just stoned out of his mind, and so this is it starts with something so innocent, but then it ends up in face down in the mud in the Mekong Delta, and so needs to be exposed. Well, in Pitch Perfect, they actually take the whole show onto a military base, which is completely absurd. It had nothing to do with the actual storyline, but they moved the whole thing into a military base, and the military base is portrayed basically as a kind of a Disneyland. It's you have handsome, sexy servicemen. You've got all kinds of this patriotism where people are like civilians are coming up thanking the soldiers for their service and heroism and protecting us against the crazed fanatics in the Middle East, that are almost at our shores. They even threw in, of course, the required lesbian character, right?
Yeah,
who's now going to enlist, because hey, gay people can also be heroes, and so it's very blatant propaganda. They actually in the article that I had read, which was written by Caitlin Johnstone, and she's has a blog called Medium.com, and she had pointed out that the military individuals who had been involved with it had come up with quotes, and that they're basically in no uncertain terms taking credit for creating the story. and so they cite this one guy, Captain Meredith Kirchhoff, that the film humanizes the human resources used to power the American war machine. Well, I mean, we have a real problem, don't we, when the characterization that we have of the military, comes from Hollywood, because Hollywood is basically just reflecting the propaganda that the military is trying to sell the public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, you mentioned Hollywood's, liaising or meeting with the military. That goes back to almost Hollywood's founding with the War Department. With the movie Wings, the silent film, then Hell's Angels, the Howard Hughes film. Of course, in the 30s, particularly then we're on to the Second World War. You had things like Sergeant York coming out in 1941. Glorifying America's entry into World War One, and this denigrating ideas of pacifism. Of course, you've Casablanca, although came out in 1942, it had been produced in 41, and this, of course, that shows how impossible it is for any good American to be isolationist. You must be an interventionist. Right. You can't afford to stay out of it. That's the whole idea behind Casablanca and these things. And so, and those who know about the Disney Corporation know that the War Department pretty much took it over throughout the war, and then Disney Films produced a whole bunch of propaganda films, cartoons. They helped develop the maps that people saw in the newsreels and these things. A lot of the morale-boosting films, they call it, I guess you could say, would be like Donald Duck cartoons telling people to pay their taxes and put up with the rationing and these things. That was for the Treasury Department. So all these propaganda films and that type of partnership never ended. In fact, after the war, it sort of was formalized. The CIA, of course, itself had connections to filmmaking. Of course, the OSS itself, I think, produced a film. It's called OSS, I think. I think Tom Secker did some research. Tom Secker has done some great research on this, actually, out of the UK about national security. I think they have a book called National Security Cinema that details this stuff, that kind of collates and organizes all the research they've done throughout the years regarding the military and national security state and Hollywood. But yeah, this movie I think it was called OSS, and it glorified the exploits of the OSS during the war and the role it played in defeating the evil Axis powers. And I think in one of the films there's some sort of operation going down, and this is, I think, this is a post-war film, but it's supposed to be taking place in, I think it was made in 1945 or 44, maybe even during the war. I forget what. But anyway, the actual term Central Intelligence, we need a Central Intelligence Agency, is actually used in the film. This is before 1947. So
wow.
So they're promoting the necessity not only for the military, but also for a permanent, cryptocracy, an intelligence agency, because I think the focus of the film will show just how far America was behind its adversaries in having, lawless, secretive cryptocracies that can cloak and dagger stuff, that can go out and fight the dirty wars that are necessary to defend and expand democracy, defend the free world. But that type of programming, it's in the films. We need a Central Intelligence Agency. And lo and behold, a few years later,
not have one of those. Just let's have it immediately.
Yeah.
It's funny when I was reading like some of the propaganda arcs of how the relationship, the kind of the broadest stroke I saw, the one I thought might be amusing for the listeners to cogitate upon, is Bimbo's Initiation, which was created by Max Fleischmann and but it featured Mickey Mouse. It actually had Walt's character. So Walt and Fleischmann were working together, though Fleischmann is the one who's credited with creating it and producing it. But clearly Disney was involved. And since Bimbo's Initiation is an obvious homage to a Freemason, the way that they're able to basically control people, it's not particularly symbolic. It's just what the thing is about. It really kind of shows, and of course, Fleischmann and Disney were both Masons, right? So they have the secret society background. And then Walt, of course, pops up again in just after World War II in the secret military base in Laurel Canyon. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, that's really interesting because, see, you also have from there, you have David Crosby, Jim Morrison, and Peter Fonda.
Oh, Henry's.
Yeah. Now, this is very interesting because, so you have, these are all hippies and proponents of drug taking. I mean, Easy Rider was just, an obvious propaganda piece to shatter the family, and it was the other side of the jaws of destruction around the generation, the other being the Vietnam War. But did you know that Henry Fonda was an intelligence officer during World War II? And see, so this is very interesting because, Jim Morrison's father, the high-ranking admiral, the guy who oversaw the Gulf of Tonkin false flag, Frank Zappa's father, MK Ultra chemist, high-level military intelligence, and then David Crosby, his dad was OSS. And so when you look at these arcs, right, between generation and product, the different kinds of films they make, from Bimbo's Initiation to Easy Rider, you can see that the military propaganda is not just the glorification of war. It's also different ways to basically control the population, to make them servile. So, and it's unified. The propaganda on one side comes at us, as like, for example, the counterculture creation. But on the other side, you get the glorification of the task of the United States. And even though these two things are often shown as a dialectic, like they're in competition, it ends up in exactly the same place for both groups.
Are you suggesting Jane Fonda was not the real deal?
Well, I'll tell you, the first 5 minutes of Barbarella had me convinced. Um, so, I mean, I still can't believe that she's an agent. But I would think that, you see, this is how I see the system.
But Joe,
work.
Jane Fonda went to Vietnam, and she
See, there it is, and her brother was, glorifying drug taking and communal living and the shattering of family. And they're clearly rebelling from Henry, aren't they?
Yes.
Who is a staid individual, and there could never be some kind of relationship between the two camps. But I actually think it's all just done as as theater.
Yeah, Peter and Jane are as different from their father as David Crosby was different from his father, as that photograph showed, right?
Exactly right. Yeah, they're so different. It's just incredible how different they are, and yet it all ends up kind of in the same place. And so it's sort of like Gloria Steinem, this couldn't possibly be something that would be in the would be against the actual lives of the American women, right? Mm-hmm. She's so earnest trying to fight for it. So the propaganda is pretty complicated, and it's hard to see. But I would just say that you really have to be really skeptical of anyone who has a kind of generational relationship into either military intelligence or into Hollywood, because you see, I just don't think it works in the way people are told. I mean, I don't think the Beatles and the Rolling Stones are the result of hard work and talent. I think that they are, they are the result of a decision being made to take European youth culture into a more integrated world. And that's going to be part of the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll separation from ethnic communities, which were obviously a problem for the oligarchs and had to be destroyed.
Well, the military is a huge part of that, just the war itself, because just the social engineering aspect of mobilization, the draft and pulling all the boys from the farms and sending them overseas into Asia and Europe and the Pacific, then bringing them back. They're not going to go back to the farm. How do you get the boy back in the farm once he's seen gay Paris, as they said during World War I? And so just the huge, just the trauma from war, not just the war itself, but just the cultural trauma, being pulled away from your family for 3, 4, or 5 years. That's going to separate you from your family. That's going to deracinate you, so to speak, and you're going to come back, and all of a sudden, everyone's become more mobilized. The military itself, because, the interstate highway system, according to the standard narrative, was a result of Eisenhower being impressed with the Autobahn, supposedly, and being designed for military reasons. Although it really never was designed for military reasons. It was designed to disperse the population, get them out of the cities and into suburbia. You can just tell how they're designed. They're not there to accommodate military equipment. But there was a huge social engineering feat right there. America was far different in 1940 than it was in 1950. And I don't think you can, it's probably just as profound 1940 to 1950 as it was between 1960 and 1970. And just as in 1960, 1970, there was a lot of social engineering and planning going on there. Well, same with World War II, and that was foreseen back in the early part of the 20th century. And when you get with Norman Dodd and his investigation into the foundations, where that investigator Catherine Casey uncovered the minutes from the Carnegie, I think it was the Carnegie Foundation, where they determined that war was the best way to fundamentally change collectivized society in these things. And lo and behold, I think that was like 1910, 1908 around. In the next 30, 40 years, you're at war. And World War I, World War II, then Korea, the police action, then Vietnam, the undeclared war. Constant war. Just think about the amount of trauma and what it does to the economy. The entire state of California, pretty much what we know, modern California, was built around entertainment and the military-industrial complex. And the two played off each other.
That's right. And that's one thing I really think that I'm glad you're bringing up is that the fact that there is the seeming opposition. You have Peter Fonda and Henry Fonda. You have Jim Morrison and Admiral Morrison, and you have David Crosby and Colonel, whatever his name, Floyd Crosby, right? And you go, well, it's a free country. Look, the youth are rebelling, right? But actually, they're just conducting another phase of the operation of enslavement. Mm-hmm. You see, and so that's it's sort of like the problem that people have looking at Donald and Hillary. If they can get you to hate one of these two individuals, they've won, mm-hmm. because their dramatic production has created a sense of reality, right? If you hate either Hillary or the Donald, you have been brainwashed successfully, because now in the election you will you may not like what goes on in the country, but by God, the person you hate either won or lost. And so you mistake that for the idea of democracy, which is basically the illusion of freedom. I mentioned last week that the oligarchs don't rule, in spite of the Constitution. They rule because of it. They have control over us because they're able to manipulate this particular set of laws so easily. It's designed for them to be able to manipulate the different electoral systems inside our country, so they can just control the political apparatus. But the public doesn't know they're being enslaved because they think that the Constitution is there to protect them. I actually spent, when I came back from New Zealand, I was there in Los Angeles. We couldn't come back home, and I had nothing to do. So all I did was play over and over again the preamble to our last show where you described the American political system. I just thought that was so brilliant. I sometimes I would laugh till tears would roll down my cheeks, and other times I would cry. I mean, that's something everyone should understand, the sarcasm, how brilliant that particular vignette is. If you can just listen to it, you really get a sense of how the wool's pulled over the people's eyes. So what we're talking about today, the militarism, you can't talk about any of these things, militarism, the counterculture, feminism, you can't talk about them in isolation. They don't operate in an isolated sense. They operate in unity. It's the overall package. It's both Henry, crotchety old American patriot, the drug-crazed Peter Fonda on listening to, like, driving his motorcycle with Born to be Wild. Mm-hmm. And God help me, it's Jane Fonda at the beginning of Barbarella with the clothes off floating in space. It's all part of the same thing, you see. But if you make the mistake of thinking, well, Peter and Jane have rebelled, haven't they? You see, it's a free country. Look, there's rebellion. Then you're missing the whole way that you're being programmed. And it's just like with Trump and Hillary. If you hate one or the other, you've already basically lost control of your mind, mm-hmm. because it's all fake. You're literally mistaking a theatrical production as something that's real, and you can't never succeed in this world with that blunder. It just the world is too vicious. There's too many people that are out trying to enslave, and if you don't think clearly, you're going to be lost. And so that's why militarism is really valuable to understand. When we see the giant flags, covering the entire stadiums now, in football games, whatnot, they're definitely trying to, promote war, normalize us as the citizens of a warfare state. But when you see Jon Stewart make jokes, about Donald Trump, you're also being exposed to the same system of propaganda. In that case, it's just trust development, so that when the key issue comes, like 911, Stewart can come in with his control over your mind and say, well, 911 it's the people who are truthers are crazy. Right.
And do it in humor. What they do is they don't really address it in a substantive, serious debate, because then
well, they lose.
they couldn't handle it, so they ridicule. And
well, it's like we talk about Tucker Carlson, the Lifetime actor, and you mentioned that he was asked about Building 7's collapse, and I can't quote him, but I mean the gist is that he just said, well, of course these things can happen accidentally because it did happen.
Yeah.
Right. He just basically almost like an insane logical fallacy, right? It's just absurd. But his position of authority enables him to get away with stuff like that. It's like Noam Chomsky, where he's so lovable and he's got this bizarre, incomprehensible kind of theories of how sentences are structured and whatever this is. So he's sort of smart and he's sweet and he's calm, and then he talks about 911 and he goes, well, these things happen. It's just that all of these little weird details, like the building collapsing symmetrically at free fall speed, and it just happens. It just happens, Tim.
Well, he gets credibility because he'll raise some interesting, good points about various topics, so American militarism, American empire, and these things.
Exactly.
Selectively. Yeah. Same with Tucker Carlson. He'll bring on some crazy feminist or some social justice warrior, make a fool out of him, and that gets everyone going, yeah, well, I can trust Tucker. He's great. Look at Tucker. I can trust Noam.
Exactly. Yeah, and so it's just like I can hate Hillary. Yeah. I can hate the Donald, so it must be a real election. I mean, is this clear? I hope everyone that listened to us, because it's a pretty simple point.
And it also, of course, it distracts from much who's really calling the shots or what interests are really calling the shots. And I think I suggested that maybe perhaps another topic might be who they is. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's critical because it's all part of the same thing.
Because I ran into that over the weekend. They were talking about. Some relatives were talking about. They're always saying about who they is, and they ask, who's they, and I go, I don't know, B'nai B'rith ADL. Does that work for you? I mean, you want to go into it?
Family, the elite Jewish banking family, Skull and Bones. I mean, whenever I get hit with that,
Council of Foreign Relations. I
don't let go of it. I say, okay, well, I'm glad you asked that, and then I give them like 50 people, And I go, and by the way, here's another list, that I want you to say. So they really is like, it's sort of like this idea that there can't be a conspiracy that uses the government because government is too incompetent, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they go, well, how could the government do that? I mean, they can't even get the tax structure right, So, I mean,
well, the tax structure is the way it is because it's supposed to be the way it is.
Right, exactly. But it's the whole thing is that the public, without the understanding of the secret society, without the understanding of them, brother, you're just lost. You are lost in this world. You cannot understand it. It makes no sense. You might have, maybe you can root for the Chicago Cubs and hate Hillary Clinton, but that's about as far as you can go intellectually. You can't really understand it if you don't have that basic structure. And militarism is a good portal, very good point to get in on. Because when you see it, it's so blatant. Then it's a way for people to go, there has to be something more in back of it. How can the military, which supposedly is under this democratic control, please listen to Tim's preamble to the show last week to get an understanding of how the system is supposed to operate. Since the military is supposed to be under democratic control, how can it do things like that to damage the minds of the civilians? Well, it can't, and the fact that you have things like MK Ultra and Operation Mockingbird and the participation of the U.S. military in all of these just blatantly illegal activity is because it isn't under the control of democracy at all, right? That means that there is a system of control that's invisible inside the thing. It has to exist. It does exist. We don't understand the real connections that the secret society has through the generals, the chiefs of staff. They're probably family members, ethnic, cryptos or whoever are people who have taken oaths. Because, like we were talking about, well, how war is good just for the kind of mental process. It breaks people down. And that's one of the reasons I'm sure that the oligarchs continue the wars as they do. There's a number of reasons, but one of them just has to be to put humans in a situation where they have agreed to be broken down mentally and become robots.
Yeah, well, more or less kind of like a nationwide boot camp, psychologically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to follow orders because we're all depending on instant obedience.
Don't you know there's a war on? How dare you ask questions?
Yeah. Don't question a damn thing. Just pull a grenade pin and throw it into the families. So
I mean, this is acknowledged because even during World War II, it's acknowledged that information was censored as Office of War information for the purposes of morale. That all this, what the thing is, they're not going to give you all the information. So you, as a citizen, when you vote, write your congressman or hold your public officials accountable, are going to have all the information necessary to determine whether or not it's a good idea to go to war or to stay at war, because the people who are conducting war will determine that itself will be bad for morale. So when they say things like politics ends at the water's edge, these things, well, what? No, but that's the whole myth of democratic control of these things, because the public is never given the information it needs even if it had the inclination to think about these things in mass, to hold their elected officials accountable, and not to mention the military. Because that's the whole myth behind democratic control, as if millions and millions of Americans who are busy working or distracted with entertainment are going to spend time, scrutinizing public policy, following news stories, looking for inconsistencies, whether or not the news follow up on one story or other, whether or not a news story even makes sense, it's true, or one scandal is reported. Well, do they follow up on the scandal? I mean, if there are reports of atrocities committed overseas by U.S. troops and it's reported one time somewhere, is the public going to say, "Hey, wait a second, you're not talking about that today? You talked about it yesterday. Why aren't you talking about it today?"
We can't damage the morale of the soldiers, for God's sake. Which side of the war are you on?
No one can follow this stuff. I mean, I would just think the other day I was just reading about an article about Syria, about what's going on in there, and Trump announced that he's going to maintain troops in Syria, the border there, and they're going to support his Kurdish army. And I'm thinking, well, you support the Kurds. The problem with that is the Kurds are trying to break away from Turkey, and Turkey is a member of NATO, and that could break NATO up if you do this, because they don't want Kurdish independence. These things. At the same time, you're destabilizing Syria. You're hurting Turkey, which is for one reason or another is a NATO member. And I'm reading through this article, different names, thinking, okay, this is like when people voted for Trump, they didn't say, I'm going to vote for Trump because he's going to foment the civil war in Syria to take out the Assad regime. But it's happening anyway.
What happened to the globalism Trump?
No globalism. Thank you. But then it goes just the amount of detail in this article. I forget. I mean, I follow these things rather closely, but even then, I forget the detail of these things. And after a while, it all kind of blends into just one like gray blob of information. If you don't. Just think of it from a public standpoint. Is the public's not going to hold the people accountable because the press, which we've talked about, that we rely on, supposedly, the Fourth Estate to distill this information for us and inform us, is totally controlled by the military and the intelligence agencies. Because those agencies are controlled by the financial interests that rule the roost, who are ultimately controlled by a handful of oligarchic families. And that's the power structure. I mean... So
okay, well, Tim, I have to confess, I have a little piece of vanity. I regard myself as sort of an expert in the Middle East, particularly the wars. Mm-hmm. I spent a lot of time. I can't make hide or hair out of it.
Yeah.
If you ask me I would have no clue. There are organizations that pop up, Hamas. I mean, who are they? You study them. What happens? I mean, basically. I kind of think what you're seeing there is almost like a World War I thing, where it's the whole purpose of it is just to basically kill Muslims, right? And to come up with completely cockamamie ideas to give the public as to why this is being done. Mm-hmm. I think that there really isn't any, I mean, I don't believe that things like ISIS exist without the authorization and funding, right, of the oligarch families. Mm-hmm. So there is a purpose for them, and there's that is propaganda purpose. But then when you look at sort of like the different groups inside Syria, even Assad himself, some of the behavior that he exhibits. Man, I smell a rat. I think that in the world of militarism, absolutely pseudo rationale for just genocide are easy to slip over the public. And if I was making a joke about being vain because actually I don't know, I can't understand anything that goes on there because I don't think there's anything to understand. Mm-hmm. I think it goes to understand what's going on. You have to look far deeper into what the oligarchs intend for the region. And therefore, the way that they get to that point, every single thing, every element, the Yemen situation, the Saudi Arabia is now, battling here. All of this is nonsense. All of the rationale. It's all just population reduction over a long term. You're going to end up with the Muslims being moved out and greater Israel, from the Nile to the Euphrates and beyond. That's what the phrase actually, states. So that's really what is going to be the end result. That's what the oligarchs want. And everything that goes on in between is just, cockamamie tactical propaganda maneuvers.
Yeah, but Joe, it's very important that we have hundreds of thousands of troops stationed overseas because every once in a while they might go on a train and stop a terrorist attack, like in Paris. So
I just wanted to say, now Clint Eastwood, isn't senility the grounds for not having someone be a director of a movie? Did you see him at the Academy Awards a couple years ago where he was just tottering? It looked like he was just propped up by, on meds and a stick. He just looked like he was absolutely brain dead. I didn't think he would make it to the after.
Are you saying Clint Eastwood is kind of like Colonel Sanders now or something? They just put him up there?
Yeah, I think I'm not even sure he's alive at this point. The idea of making a movie about that it's like really one thing we should do maybe is having a Tim and Joe Academy Awards for the best propaganda movies of the year. Mm-hmm. And like in mine, certainly a few years ago, Zero Dark 30 would have been. That was really you have a completely fictional account of a fictional account, and it's given as reality. And I swear, I actually had an argument, or sort of, about this guy about the nature of the Bin Laden attack, and he was using Zero Dark 30 as his groundwork for his position. And it was like at a certain point, I was going, God, this is just an exercise in insanity.
Well, he saw it. You saw it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I saw it. With his own
two eyes, he saw it.
It was real. It's so that's the thing is that if you don't have that flame, that spark of skepticism that that this could be propaganda, you are really vulnerable. You're so vulnerable, and so step out of the matrix and into the sunlight, and it starts with when the militarism occurs. What do you think, Tim? You're sitting there. You're drinking a few beers. It's a propaganda piece. A lot of the people that listen to us would know that. They see the giant flag come over and the jets and things, and no one says anything. What should a person in that situation say to the people in the room? What would be effective? Or is there anything you can do?
Wake the hell up. It's like here's this movie, 1715 to Paris, whatever the title is. Right.
Yeah, I think it was a 715 to Paris.
715 to Paris. Yeah. Here is a dramatization of an event which. Are you sure it happened at all? This is what happens. They make a dramatization of an event which was probably staged. So now you have a dramatization of a staged event, and so this what this does is this sort of sanctifies or confirms in the mind of people. They may think to themselves, "Well, I'm watching a movie, which may not be totally real because it's a movie. They had to make it interesting." but the
but
events
it's based on a real event.
Yeah, like Tora, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean that's the thing is that so movies are very effective in terms of mind control. There's not a lot of details known about the studio that was set up in Laurel Canyon, but enough can be inferred, by the people who were in that they were studying pornography, they were studying special effects, and then they were probably also studying the effects of music, in video, seeing how it could be used. And then that's why the Laurel Canyon music scene, was literally, within 100 yards of the facility, it just pops to life, and so that would have that would be the level of sophistication you're dealing with, and now we've got this double and tripling, where you have the fictional event covered by the fictional media, and then Hollywood makes a movie based on a real event, and so that becomes what history is, and that's what people know of history. They see with militarism, you have to just bear in mind that you have to understand it as propaganda, but you should also look at it as something that's part of a broader structure, and there can just because something is opposed to militarism, like Noam Chomsky, doesn't mean that it's not part of the process of mind control and enslavement.
Yeah, it's important because if you read Christopher Simpson's book, The Science of Coercion, and he focuses a lot on the development of mass communication starting in the late 1930s. Of course, he focuses on the Radio Research Project out of Princeton and Hadley Cantrell,
right,
and the War of the Worlds Halloween Eve broadcast October 3rd, 1938. That's an interesting year and timing for that. The effects of a fake broadcast, not just the effect of the broadcast itself, but also the exaggeration, the reported exaggeration of people's reaction to that was followed by these people spending a lot of time and money gauging and charting the public's response to these things and the effects of mass communication. And in that book, Christopher Simpson says the whole study and therefore the development of mass communication was all funded by the War Department, the military, and after the Second World War, the CIA. For the purposes,
right, exactly.
Mass communication was developed for the purpose of mass manipulation and psychological warfare. There's also coincides with the development of the Psychological Strategy Board and C.D. Jackson in the Eisenhower administration, and the development of certain film and also radio and music, and I think even outfits like EMI, which would produce records for the Beatles, were all tied to the military in Britain. And the same thing if you go with the Columbia Studios, these things, record company, these in the United States, all these big corporations, all tied into Columbia Broadcasting Corporation. These things, it's all tied into the national security state.
Yeah, William Paley, who's a Jewish, OSS guy, and you can just see these threads. They're not really that hard to follow. I don't want to,
Elvis Presley. Remember we did a show on Elvis Presley based on the Miles Mathis article. His manager, Tom Parker, got into the country, took the name of the soldier that let him in illegally, right?
I know, completely absurd, right?
And he looks like a spook. If you just look at his life, he looks like he's a spook, and he's managing Elvis Presley.
Right. And so you can see that our culture is just the way it works is not as people think. The basic component they got to realize is that the individual is not in front of you because there was some kind of market that he has won. In other words, Elvis Presley wasn't, good dancer, attractive looking guy. I guess he had a pretty good singing voice. That's not why he's up there. Mm-hmm. That's why he is the one who the media is presenting. He is the one the media is presenting because they are doing something to your mind, and he is the device that they've chosen to use. The Beatles, this wasn't just someone trying to sell a bunch of records. This was someone trying to wreck a bunch of minds, right? This is what this is about. And so you have to automatically, when you see celebrity, be suspicious. Every time there is a celebrity, every time you see Jane Fonda floating naked in space, you have to go, okay, she's attractive. And, my mind, it's hard to focus, when she's on screen like this. But, there is probably a reason why she's there. There's probably a reason that an oligarch has for this precise image coming to you. Hollywood wasn't created, to basically sell movie tickets. When Wilbur Hayes was going around the country under the cover of the production code and getting every single small town to have a movie theater in it, every single small town should have resisted and burned the thing to the ground.
Yeah.
It's there to understood what the evil was in back of this entire industry of Hollywood.
It's there to enslave you to your passions and appetites, which makes you a slave, because then again you lose your critical faculty or your these things, and if you become enslaved to your passions and desires, you become a consumer. And then, and you're in a position now to be sold something.
And well, basically, you're on the way to genocide. Look, there are two principles that you have to operate under. Everything else is, and those are strength and virtue. Right? That's it. Strength and virtue. These are the characteristics of successful humans. Mm-hmm. And if you want to find happy, well, find Kim Kardashian. Maybe she'll give you some opiates,
Yeah, and they're there to market goods, because Kardashian wears a certain perfume. They'll market the perfume. Yeah,
well, and also they're there to market a certain consciousness.
Yeah.
The idea that, this giddy kind of, giggling, opioid-fused, mindlessness is actually something that's valuable. The happy thing is it's one of the Hollywood things that they sell to keep people basically moving forward toward genocide. But it's the exact opposite of what the people need to develop, which is just these two things. They got to be strong and they got to be virtuous.
And the destruction of ethnic consciousness, because that's one thing the military does too, because it breaks you down, right?
Right. Yeah. It gets rid of all that.
Gets everyone. We hear stories about the platoon in Vietnam. There's a guy with an Italian name. There's a black guy. There's a Polish name, and then there's an Irish name. And this is America. And we've been sold that this is America. We're all deracinated. We have no ethnic consciousness, and that was a function of the military. Because before that, America was pretty much a confederation of different ethnic communities, particularly in the North. And
each of them that had tremendous political power and could resist oligarchy.
Basically, they won't sign on to the empire, the American century, Henry Luce's American century, because they have different interests than the Eastern Seaboard elite that Henry Luce represented, and these with Skull and Bones and all that stuff. But you'll see that with it. And again, the thing is, they'll pathologize ethnic consciousness. Meaning, good example, Italian ethnic consciousness is pathologized in the role of the mafia. Right?
Sure.
Yeah. So that's pathologized. It's abusive fathers.
German ethnic.
Well, that's the ultimate, isn't it?
It's pathologized in the role of the Nazi.
Goose stepping brown shirts and Nazis.
Anyone who knows, the trajectory from, British Zionism through Helen Blavatsky and the Thule Society into the so-called Nazi Party with all the occultism. This is another. Look, these are just fake structures. They're just done to make people, experience the genocide as a dialectic, rather than just straight population reduction by a group that hates them.
And of course, the role of celebrities and cults of personality, like certain political figures and celebrities, you could kind of. They're there. That's why they were created in the first place, and they were created. That's sort of Edward Bernays developed that process of Enrique Caruso. But the Hollywood itself, with Rudolph Valentino and these things, and the creation, the magazines, and that's what the function of the theaters with these, and then these celebrities can then promote whether it's products or a certain cultural agenda. Obviously. I mean, Hollywood right now. I mean, Hollywood, what it's projecting out to the United States and the entire world, for that matter. It's promoting Americanism and these things. It's an instrument for the New World Order, globalism, monoculture, and just to roll the fact that they produce, the fact that so many celebrities just themselves, are being promoted as people to emulate or to follow, whether it's the scandals, their opulent lifestyle, these things. They'll have a whole show about Katy Perry's mansion, as if, why would we care about this, or who's divorcing whom, or who's having an affair with whom, or who's doing something with what, Harvey Weinstein, these things, these scandals, and everyone's talking about the exploits or the degenerate lifestyle of celebrities as if this matters to anybody.
All right. It's just kind of pornography.
Yeah.
I mean, the same way that pornography sucks the mind in, and you then start developing appetites for particular looking females and particular kinds of sexual acts, none of which are likely to happen in the real world.
Which leads to impotence, ironically.
Right. And then you end up with you can't even have sex with the real women in your life, which incidentally is becoming more and more clear. Mm-hmm. That pornography is just it's a way to compartmentalize.
And look where we're talking about Hollywood itself, but they're rolled into the military. But that's how the military is now being used to confuse these roles, because the recruitment of women is yet another example of them brutalizing femininity, destroying it, and marginalizing masculinity. These things. Creating these problems between male and female, these things. That's part of the function of this sort of Me Too campaign. They turn Hollywood's degenerate scandals into an opportunity to promote another brand of feminism. And at the same time, they smearing all men, these things, and they create this sort of victim narrative where all these starlets that line up to take their clothes off for roles in movies, then these sex objects became raging feminists overnight, as lecturing.
I'll tell you, I just wanted to say, any parent that has a kid that is studying or somehow has become enamored with the idea of being an actor or an actress, get them the hell out of acting school.
Yeah, it's horrible.
I mean, that is an absolute, grindstone to pulverize the soul of the individual. Because
Mm-hmm.
Look, there's no way they can succeed. The people like Kardashian and Jane Fonda that are the icons, that the North Star that people want to move toward. These are oligarchic structures. They're not real human beings. They were chosen, out of these secret society needs. And your kid isn't gonna make it.
Yeah, and would you want them to emulate the lifestyle of Jane Fonda?
Wouldn't want anyway. But what's going to happen is that after like 5 years of acting classes, you'll get, one role as a topless zombie whose head is eaten.
Yeah.
And that will be the career. It's just a complete soul suck. So you have to get your kid out in the same way that people have to turn Hollywood off. Just turn it off. The only thing you should be listening to is our show and a few others. But you have to go to the alternative media. I didn't mean to speak light of that, but you've got to go to the alternative media, find ways to get information, because mainstream is mainstream propaganda. Militarism is part of it. It's just, it shows up as a point in the spectrum, and people think, well, that means that, like an actress that promotes GBTL culture and pacifism shows that we're not, that Hollywood has, there's freedom of thought. Because on one hand, you've got people promoting militarism, and the other hand, you have, GBTL and pacifism. It's one system. Mm-hmm. Everything is there just to destroy ethnic community and take people into the New World Order, where they are isolated from their ethnicity, from their family, and from their spouse. and the children are produced by the state. So the opposite of that is strength and virtue.
This is kind of what we're up against. I was just reading an article. Yeah. This is from 2009, the Washington Post. The White House proposes cuts in military recruiting budget. And citing the Pentagon's recent success in meeting its manpower needs, the Obama administration is proposing to cut the defense budget, the Defense Department's budget for recruiting by nearly $800 million, or 11% for 2010. The proposed budget would reverse years of increased spending aimed at bolstering military forces strained by 6 years of combat in Iraq and nearly 8 years in Afghanistan. From 2004 to 2008, annual funding for recruiting and retention programs more than doubled from $3.4 billion to $7.7 billion. So they're spending $7.7 billion on recruitment and retention amid a deep recession that has made the military more appealing option for job seekers. I
love the doublespeak.
Yeah,
because they don't have any money, it's more appealing, right?
It's more, so people,
when you're starving, like a piece of glyphosate infested, poison is really appealing, because this is the thing, is that people are so beaten down that by the financial, social situation, that the military is like looking like the only option. And then when they see the militarism, and it works well in terms of propaganda as far as getting a little patriotism going on inside them, they're just going to make a very bad decision. Basically, I am the poster boy for anti-recruitism. There could be don't join the army kind of posters can start propping up, because it's you're just going to get in there. They're going to mess with your mind. You're going to be told stuff about the rationale for the wars. You're going to be given 911 and the crazed terrorist concept in the Middle East. And you're just going to go over there and kill people and then come back. And at some point, there's going to be a voice inside of you that's going to say, I just didn't understand it. And you're just going to feel lost. And at that point, it's, when you look at the militarism, Tim, and the propaganda, and then the statistic of the number of veterans who commit suicide, right? You can see that there's something wrong with the propaganda.
Yeah.
Something's happening to our troops over there. They're realizing when they come back. I don't know because I haven't been there, but I know the statistics of suicide are just catastrophic, and so this is a symptom to me of that their humanity can be conditioned, but they can't extinguish it. Jon Stewart and Noam Chomsky can make jokes or be, kind of loving and avuncular and fool you. But at the end of the day, your basic humanity will pop up to the surface. And then you're going to wonder what you did, with your life and your actions. And so rather than go in and become a robot, how about just staying outside the military and working on your own strength and virtue?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we're still in a situation where, Bradley Manning, when he exposes a crime being committed by U.S. soldiers, people who are hemmed up on militarism and this faux patriotism, jingoism, nationalism, will call for his head rather than say, well, he exposed wrongdoing.
Right.
Instead, he's put into prison, subjected to God knows what, and then comes out this Chelsea Manning running for the Senate was a woman. So,
and then you get like John McCain, asking for his head. Just look in the background of McCain's family. I mean, it's just it's this Masonic generational cesspool. I think they've all been admirals.
Yeah, military, and because he is the one that had that incident on that aircraft carrier. He killed a bunch of soldiers, and he set some order. He was goofing off on a plane or something, and he was shuffled off. But of course, his second wife, I think, her father was a lieutenant for the Brofman crime family, the Jewish crime family.
Right.
And so he's connected to organized crime and these things. So.
Yeah, I mean, and so it's just, the militarism, I think, is exposed. People can. There's enough available on the internet for someone to do basic work, and I'm sure realize that even if you're not as extreme in your position as, come to the point where you're in extreme position as I am, you realize that they are systematically using military propaganda in different ways to make the public less able to resist it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so when you get to that point, we need to organize ourselves in opposition to it. First step is spread the word, right? You need to tell people this is going on, and that gets back to the question of the beer drinker. He's sitting there at the NFL title game. He's just popped a cylinder, and here comes the American flag covering the football field. Mm-hmm. Do you say anything? Do you say, well, this is being done to mess with our minds, Well,
the Pentagon's paying the NFL to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't patriotism. It's a business proposition.
Right. And people are making decisions that'll end up with death based on, this propaganda. So if you don't say anything, if you just go back to the Bud Light and pull it down and wait for the kickoff, is that really strength and virtue? I don't think so. I think that, years from now you wonder, maybe I should have said something, when your children are dying in some foreign land and nothing has changed in our country and we are just completely a slave state, an overt one. Maybe it's time when we have a little bit of freedom and free speech to say something. Those who are aware that this is propaganda, say something, speak out.
There was an ad for, was it the Marines? I forget. But the ad just consists of these amphibious vehicles rolling up, and these soldiers running out on a beach, and all running.
Yeah, thousands of them. I've seen that.
And something they don't retreat. They go one direction. I forget what the tagline was.
But like some people go forward.
Moving forward. They should show the trench scene from the Somme or something.
That when it's funny. I had a similar idea when I see that, and just to flesh it out, you see thousands of American servicemen with armed to the teeth, mm-hmm. planes, jets, tanks. Everyone is going forward. They're all running in one direction. I've always thought that the camera should turn around and show the other side, and you'd see like a family of Muslims, like a mother with two children, to get an idea of what the heroism is really.
Well, what Muslims do is they put bombs in their kids' clothes and then send them to go, because that's what American Sniper was about. Remember how?
Yeah, sure.
This is what these people do, and of course, no one even thinks about where are they. A little geography. Oh, they're in Iraq. Oh, right. wait a second. That's like 8,000 miles. What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, why are we? So the Middle East is it's not a puzzle. It isn't. There's nothing to solve. It's just it's chaos, and it's deliberate chaos. The public are kept deliberately confused. Instead of some kind of clear understanding, the origin of ISIS or what our military policy has brought, none of this matters. It's all terrorism, right? The terrorism is.
Well, there's never any context to this. Do you remember a while back when that
and the militarism? You get the oh my God, they've blown up Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And then they'll cut to the American flag being unfurled at the football game, and they'll have like 15 guys who have one leg, limp out onto the field, and give the flag salute.
Worse, they'll have some like young lady there with a missing leg, and we're supposed to be all proud about that.
Yeah, this is a great thing.
Proud of that. But you remember a while back when that freight ship was hijacked by the Somali pirates? This was about 6-7 years ago.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, of course, the story is I think it was the U.S. Navy takes it back eventually. They snipers come in and they liberate the ship from these pirates, and that the only context we're given is the Somali pirates and this freighter, and they made a movie about it with Tom Hanks.
Right. He gets around, doesn't he?
He's everywhere, man.
He's what you call a lifetime actor.
Yeah. And remember all that was going down, I was just thinking, well, really, is it the job of the U.S. Navy to protect freighters? Shouldn't freighters and their insurance companies come up with ideas to ensure the cargo and the crew, and then that be worked into the price structure and these things, and that should be the true cost of international trade. Should we be socializing the security risk of these freighters? I mean, if I had a sailing vessel, I wouldn't get the protection of the Navy. These things.
No.
So you should. And aren't there countermeasures they could have and these things? And perhaps I was just oh no, wait, this is the military. Pirates are evil, and this is a chance to celebrate our military. That was kind of the response I was getting from my siblings. It was like, this isn't the job, and it really isn't the job of the military. If they're in the area, they may. Out of serendipity, they may be in an area where they can do something and do some good. Like it's like relief for a storm or something. If they're there, yeah, do it. But it isn't justification for 12 aircraft carriers, because sometime they might show up and relieve a country that's been hit by a hurricane. But it turns out that if you do a little research in Somalia, the geopolitics of Somalia, what was going on there, and how that country had been devastated by the Anglo-American Zio Empire, and the corporations that have been
British
petroleum interests destabilizing that country, these things. And apparently that area, a lot of the corporations have been dumping their waste there and destroying the traditional fishing.
And that's what led to the so-called piracy.
But no one wants to hear about that.
Yeah,
no one wants to hear. No, you're making no. There's a context here. I mean, come on. I mean,
so there it is. It's militarism plus terrorism. So Tim, I have to tell you something. 2 days ago, I took this long plane ride, and it is a strange thing to come back to the United States. It is very odd. This whole thing at the airport, I'm seeing it as a replication of the feudal system, where one of the first things they did when they set it up was reduce or almost make impossible travel.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone had to stay put. Everyone had to stay in place. That was my sense of it. Is that when you come back to the United States, it's like welcome to the feudal system. And then, of course, militarism was promoted tremendously by Rome. It was one of the first propaganda campaigns with all of the fancy standards and divine, aspects of the military.
The tribute, the parade, right?
So it's this long-standing technique to get the hoi polloi to give up their blood. Let's stop this. It's just ridiculous. We need to spread the information, Tim.
Yeah. And so it reminds you of that scene, the closing scene in the movie Patton, which is supposedly an anti-war movie. It ended up being very popular at the time. It's a great movie, cinematography. It's a great movie. And it turns out Patton might have been assassinated anyway, because he was opposing the post-war agenda. But that scene where he goes, for hundreds of years in Rome, victorious generals would be brought back to Rome and given a tribute, a parade. From all around the empire, slaves would be brought in, and animals from the empire, and these things, and to thousands of cheering. And behind him, in his chariot, riding with the general, would be a slave whispering into his ears, "Glory is fleeting." Yeah,
well, it's great. The secret society, they kicked the slave out of the chariot.
Yeah.
And, they want it permanently. So,
and also meant for years, Romans, you couldn't bring the army across the Rubicon. And so that was
that's another thing. It's like the U.S. military, it's just becoming part of the police department. Okay, so it's like I was.
Well, yeah, it's another thing. You look at the police. Look at that. All that is a large function of that is just because all the hardware that the military-industrial complex produces, they got to sell it to somebody. And then they create markets for it. And of course, one market is the increasingly militarized police force. So every town has a barricade, a tank, and these things. So
Oh God, you've just set my brain spinning like a pinwheel. I can't handle it because I'm too jet lagged.
Okay, well.
All right, brother. Listen, great talk. Thank you so much. Next week, it's going to be fantastic, folks. So be sure to tune in.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll get together next week. And, of course, Joe, have a nice weekend and get your life back together.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I hope I can. I'm going to try to get used to the U.S. slowly here. It's not easy to do.
Have you been debriefed? No, anyway.
No, right. That's what I was waiting at. Like they need to debrief me when I came in. Oh, man. All right, Tim.
Okay.
Thank you, brother.
Take it easy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.